G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube, coming to you from Bali. I do feel a little bit exposed and lost without my coffee usually to start these videos. But anyway, for today's review, we're going to cover a pretty nasty loss to the Bulldogs at Marvel in the second last game of 2025 for the Eagles. For today's episode, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, who the best players were, including promising performances from some of the developing players on our list. Then my key takeaways from the match before finally my predictions for who is pushing for a spot in the final AFL side of the season next week. So let's see what we can salvage from this one. Right from the beginning, the game didn't really start well for us. The Bulldogs piled on 4 goals to none in the first quarter. And more importantly, we actually never looked close to controlling the play at all during that period. So they kicked 4 goals, 5 to be fair. And that could really have easily been a lot more goals and left less behinds against our single behind for the quarter. Second quarter was pretty similar. We did manage to control a couple of patches of the game, which was at least a slight improvement. And that returned 2 goals for us at least. But on the other side, the Dogs did actually speed up their own scoring, and they kicked 7 and finished the half what looked like on the way to an absolute belting. Here's where some of the positives came through at least. I was worried that there would be, like I said, they were on track to cross that 100-point mark halfway through the third quarter, finish with a goal tally in the mid-20s. And we didn't win a quarter or turn the game around, but I thought there were a number of patches in the second half where we controlled the play at least, slowed their scoring down, and had some really positive individual performances at least, just to take away from the game. So as a team, we didn't really throw the towel in, nor have we, I think, at all this year, which is really good when it gets ugly. But overall, we did at least finish the game out, and it wasn't as nasty all day, which is where it was headed for the first half. So to get to our best, I think it's pretty hard to overlook Ruben James' effort last night. For a guy who's been rock solid for us down back all year, he probably played his best game for the season. The word that comes to mind to describe Jimby is power. I remember during his draft year, he was basically in the top 5 for just about everything, like leap, speed, endurance. I'm not sure if agility was one of them, but for most of the metrics coming out of that draft combine. And that's translated into, I think, what looks a bit like the Patrick Cripps of the backline this year especially. So call that a bit of a over-the-top statement, but genuinely that's how I see him. When he gets his hands on that loose ball, you can pretty much bet that he's going to be carrying it cleanly out of the contest. He's that powerful that you never really see him get pulled in. Well, if you picture what normal contested possessions look like, especially from defenders in defensive 50, you'll usually see most other guys just take that possession and then get tackled into stoppage, which some of them actually want that too, I'll admit. But that's the difference whenever I see Jimby get his hands on it. I've got no idea what he's going to be doing long term. One of my mates was saying yesterday that he hates when people talk about Jimby moving back into the midfield, just because it would be wasteful to do that to such an elite defender. I'm not going to say that I have a strong opinion either way. I know that I'd prefer Brady Hoff down back, and Jimby's definitely an elite defender, but there is a part of me that wonders what he'd look like in the middle now that he's developed into that beast that he is. I'd be keen to know what everyone else thinks on that one. It certainly wouldn't be a bad thing if we let him continue to dominate where he is and, found our core midfield elsewhere. My second best was Tom McCarthy. Speaking of moving guys into the midfield, he looked great in there for his second week of running through the middle. I know I'm a broken record on this channel saying the same thing every week about McCarthy, but I still can't believe we got someone that good that easily. Mid-season draft, and he's already performing because it was this year. He was breaking lines, had 4 clearances from his time in there, as always, he was a possession magnet, finishing with 25 disposals, which was our second most. I'm probably going to have to start cutting back how much I go on about his efforts and just say that Tom McCarthy is one of our known quantity players for us now. He's composed, disposes of the ball really cleanly, both under pressure and out in space. And at the moment, it's looking like he's one of the few A-graders that we have. Just don't forget that we have a handful of guys that are young and will be A-graders pretty soon. But at the moment, he's looking like one of them. Probably the same as the next best guy I was going to talk about now, which is Liam Baker. Speaking of known quantities as well, I think we're all pretty familiar with the contribution he makes pretty much every week. So I've thought, and I'm pretty sure a few people on this channel have actually commented too, that he's likely to be our captain next year. And it looked like he stood up really well in the role against the Bulldogs. I've seen all the little bits of footage of him around the young guys before games in the change rooms during the game, and his general desire just to win. I think personally, I can see him in that role. Possibly with like a Ruben Jinby as one of the vice captains. We'll see. Watch that space anyway. I don't think I'm making original thoughts when I say that anyway, so don't just take it from Critical AFL coming up with this idea. I think that's been put out there long before me. I'm also putting Campbell Chessa in my best players this week. He probably gets a little bit of a head start because I'm actually watching for him and a couple of the other young guys every week to see how they're developing. But for the third week in a row, his performance has been great, especially against a fast-paced Bulldogs team where he was one of the few players who looked dangerous carrying the ball for us. They were running a lot of our other guys down and just really embarrassing us, which I think I said during the game to someone that I feel like GWS and the Bulldogs right now are two of the sides that we have the least capacity to overachieve against just because of how fast they are. I know Chess has already had his breakout game already this year, in a sense that we finally got to see that he belongs at the AFL level. But I predict that his career progresses and he'll have another breakout game where he really tears teams apart, and it'll be more of an elite breakout rather than just put your hand up to actually be their breakout game. Just watching, like I said with the Bulldogs, a fast pressure game like this loss, it was clear that Chessa is dangerous with the ball in hand because of his ability to move towards space at top speed. And like I keep saying every week, his ability to hit targets over very long field passes is incredibly valuable, especially under the new system that we're using, which is really moving the ball forward cleanly but fast. To round out our best players, I think Jack Graham belongs on the list. We missed his pressure acts while he was suspended. And he finished the game yesterday with an insane 32 pressure acts, which I don't check every player because it's deep. It's more of a deep dive under each individual stats, but that's the most I've seen from any player this year by quite a bit. There might be someone from another side that's done the same, but he finished with 10 tackles, which was also a game high ahead of Tom. I think Tom Liberatore had 8. He had 20 possessions and a really decent 445 metres gain. So I'm really just pulling up the stats to support what I thought was a really good game based on him passing the eye test. So those stats really did support that. To our promising performances, again this week, Hamish Davis has stepped up a level and played, I think, his best game so far. He had a great goal last week by comparison, but he stepped up on his involvement and how much he actually got into the contest this week with 18 disposals, I think 13 it was last week, and 10 of them this week were actually contested, which is probably his strongest stat coming out of the game. He had a couple of clearances, 4 tackles, but I think what you'd find if you had access to it is that he probably has really good GPS numbers, just based on what appears to be a really high work rate. And I also think that might have been what was getting him a game earlier in the season when he hadn't really done much to catch my eye in the waffle. Anyway, 190 centimetres, I think he's shaping as a really useful frame out there for us. The other promising performance was Noah Long for me. He's in his second year. He actually debuted really early last year, and I think round 1 it was, and immediately impressed. But he's had some issues with form this year, and then out of nowhere last week, it looked like he had a massive game in the waffle, and he's gone from looking miles off getting back into the AFL side to suddenly having one of the really impressive performances against the Bulldogs, playing at the AFL level. I actually had notes that he was in our best players during the first half, but he did seem to fall away from the contest just a little bit in that second half, so he sort of found his way into my promising players because he's young. Either way, though, he finished with 1 goal. Could have been 3 because he had 1 goal too, and they were decent opportunities. And he had some damaging touches when we were struggling. So he had two clearances and 20 pressure acts, and his intensity was just back up there again. So I just hope he carries that into the preseason and next year because he's got something. He's got some ability there, and it's nice to see just at the end of the year that comes back. To my key takeaways, the main one that I think is worth reminding everybody of is that when you look at our list profile and what we did against Adelaide, it was really overachieving. And to be perfectly honest, we would need to overachieve every single week to be in the games at the moment. Our talent and the age profile and just the general development means that the effort has to be at an unsustainably high level to compete with the best sides in the competition, which is just what we did against Adelaide. Unfortunately, I don't think it's possible to do that every week. If it was, then sides could play finals intensity every round of the year on the march to a premiership without players burning out or going down, and that doesn't happen. You'll always see that lift in intensity during finals and maybe 1 or 2 times during the season. And the other unfortunate thing is that we did reserve some of our best performances this year for the better sides in the competition. And that's just what's kept us from, getting more than that disappointing one win for the season. So I think with 1 week left, I'm looking forward to seeing what we bring to Optus Stadium against Sydney in front of the home crowd, knowing that when the final siren goes next week, there will be nothing left to give this year. I don't know what to expect because they've been a bit of a bogey side for us for a while now. I think even during 2018 Premiership season, they just looked like they always had the wood on us. But I'm hoping that it's the best version of West Coast that turns up next week for the final game of the season. Which just brings me to my final predictions for the year. As I said a couple of weeks ago, being overseas in Bali, the wedding was amazing, by the way. I'm unable to access the Waffle live streams, so I'm just going off a mixture of stats in the Waffle, along with AFL form and then injuries in the AFL. So, first up, I think the walk-in change would have to be Harry Edwards. He's been a test again this week, so you would assume that makes him close to a certainty against the Swans. The next one, I would think the first opportunity, I think, would come to Tyrell Dewar, who's had some really good stats in the Waffle the last couple of weeks. It might mean a shuffle of who comes out of the side because Tyler Brockman was the guy who got subbed off yesterday, and I actually thought he was really good. He was looking really good despite his low possession count at that point. It surprised me. The other one I think could possibly be Luca Grego. I know a lot of people have asked me this year when I think he will debut, and I've never felt that he's quite on the cusp. He's been performing really well for a first-year player in the Waffle, and I just think he's been taking the standard time that a draftee should take before they're ready. That said, his stats looked a little better yesterday, and I know that his possessions, they look very very consistent every week because he's fairly reliable. So I do think it's possible he could get a taste of AFL footy for the final game of the season. But that's pretty much it, and that's a wrap for this week's AFL review. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I hope everyone else is looking forward to making the most of the last game of footy from West Coast for 2025 next week. After that, it'll be draft and trade content from me, so if you're not already a subscriber and you're still watching, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I also put out a bunch of off-season content of the players building into the upcoming season, so hopefully it's worth keeping this channel on your radar for that and more. Otherwise, I'll see you all again next week, and cheers again until then.